Hello, my name is Ben Cherry. I'm a wildlife cameraman, and today we're here on the Atomos Academy to talk about just that, filming wildlife. So I was always fascinated with wildlife as a kid. You can thank that to my dad taking me out bird watching things from about the age of 4. I was always the kid who was either outside playing sport or out exploring, trying to find nature in and around where I used to grow up, and nothing's really changed, really. I am really fortunate to do 2 things which I love at once, in viewing wildlife and also filmmaking. So I started off getting into media through stills. From about the age of 11, working with little film point and shoot cameras, to eventually working with different SLRs and then into mirrorless cameras. Stills for me were a way to document my experience of wildlife, to try and share this with others, an excuse to try and get creative. I'm a crap artist, but it's really fun to try and create something with visual imagery. And it wasn't till I started doing more and more work with NGOs, working on various different projects around the place, that film became more and more important. Because generally the projects are bigger, you're working with more people, and there's even more opportunity, in my opinion, to be creative. Because my photography was always photojournalism and focusing on story, I think that's what allowed me to switch over from stills work to video relatively quickly, in that video is another step further on that, and thinking about story, how are you going to piece it all together, how are you going to edit it, shooting for your edit. And with wildlife, that's a peculiar one. It's not like a traditional human sequence where you can maybe have 1 or 2 goes at getting something right. You can, talk to your subject about how you want to build up the sequence and the story you want to tell and how you want to tell it. With wildlife, it's being very opportunist, being prepared, and knowing your subject as well as you can, but also knowing your equipment. So I do a range of filming styles, from gimbal work to macro sliders and time lapses to obstock conservation related stuff, to my bread and butter is actually long lens behavioral work. And for me, that's basically 2 things. That's me knowing my subject as well as I can, whether that's speaking to rangers in the area, finding out a bit more about what they think about this particular individual or the local population as a whole. And then muscle memory, knowing my tripod and my lens as well as I can, whether that's smooth panning to trying to be as on it with my follow focusing as I can be. So this is my rig. So I've got a Romford Baker 2004 head. This thing's been around forever, and it's absolutely built to last, and it is super smooth and really good in all sorts of different conditions. So even though it's a bit of a lump, it's a fantastic tripod head. And I use this with all sorts of rigs, from this relatively small rig to bigger camera systems, CN20 lenses and things like that. And then I've got my lovely Panasonic EVA1, which, to be honest, is just a fantastic little camera. So small, so light, so it's great for my projects as well as broadcast projects. Being a Netflix approved camera, just producing really nice 4K and 2K files. Got a range of Sigma stills and other lenses as well. Kind of be flexible with my photographic work as well as my video work. So this is the 60 to 600, really nice focal range. So fantastic for kind of one lens to work with on a handful of my wildlife sequences. And then I've got the Atomos SHOGUN 7. And I've been using Atomos monitors now for 3 or so years, and to be honest, I always take it with me on a shoot, whether it's with the EVA1 or FS7s, which I end up using a lot, or even ARRI mirrors, Reds. I've used it on those, just not necessarily all the time for the fantastic recording capabilities in the recorder, but for it being, frankly, the best screen I've ever used. And for exactly what I was talking about before, with my bread and butter being long lens behavioural work, I need to make sure I am following my subject as smoothly and as in focus as possible. And this screen allows me to do that. I know a lot of guys really like using eyepieces, and I do to some degree. But depending on my subject, if they're moving really fast and I'm having to do a really strong whip pan, using something like this where I can be further away from the camera so then I can see what else is going on, but having a really bright, really vivid screen which is incredibly crisp with loads of focus assist and exposure assist settings means that it helps me hopefully be as good as I can be with my work. But with wildlife, for me, it's kind of, as well as trying to capture some amazing behaviour or beautiful portraits or something exotic, it's something you could do locally. So during this lockdown, I've been working in my garden, in the surrounding area, just on my little daily walk, just take a little camera with me. Again, the beauty of the EVA1 is such a small system. Whether I'm shooting ProRes or ProRes RAW into the Shogun 7, or just shooting internally and just going out with like the Ninja 5 and just having a really light setup. So with the lockdown, I've been trying to take things which I completely take for granted and try and do some quirky spin on them in how I film them. So even recently, it's beautiful springtime here in the UK, and I've been filming cut grass just to get a slightly different take using motion with the slider. But equally, you could do that with just a nice steady pan. You could get really fun shots with that, and using that as one or two establishing shots to then introduce you into some flowers or into some insects and basically set the scene for what you could go into next. So I've been doing quite a lot of stuff outside just with my Laowa probe lens, which is just a wicked little thing. Basically a 2:1, so 2 times the size of real life, macro lens, which is 24mm, and it starts at f14, so it's a really slow lens. But this thing is wicked, and it means that I can focus really close to anything and get just a really different view of things. So what we kind of sometimes call this is the kind of bug eye, so it's a kind of close wide. So you're kind of getting an insect's perspective on their environment. And I really like using this on plants, on insects, on animals if you can, safely, to anything. Sometimes I use it with commercial work, on just inanimate objects which you can, move the lens around and get some really dynamic, different shots to what otherwise you do with regular lenses. So this thing's really fun. So combining this with my slider system, and what I can do with that, I've been trying to do some dynamic moves around some plants, even if it's just a handful of flies on them, making them a little bit more interesting, but just slowing down and looking at the little things. But other things you can do is you can build bird boxes. So at the moment, everything is nesting or trying to find a nest. So I've got a blue tit nest just out of the house, and then a few other nest boxes around the place which are really fun. Something simple which you can just keep track of, and then you can set up a camera just to film. And that's really good fun. It's quite a rewarding experience when you make a little home for an animal. As well as that, you could make a little bird bath. You can even put out bird feeders. And sliders are great because they allow you to add movement to a shot to either prolong it, add an extra X factor, or to give an extra insight into something which otherwise might be a bit choppier to show via multiple static shots. But I appreciate most of you won't have, a ridiculous electronic slider system. So I have in the past done a lot of this freehand moving around, you know, whether that's really nice and low, again, using one of these screens as a nice reference point, which you can lay flat and have it straight atop the camera, and going really low on the ground, to even going up high and just doing gentle moves around trees or around different foliage, or just really nice reveal shots. Things like that you can do freehand. You don't have to have a gimbal or a slider to do. It certainly takes a lot more patience and probably recurring goes to get it right. But that's where actually using slow motion for something which doesn't necessarily usually require slow motion can be really helpful, and can give that slightly ethereal feel to something. When you can use the slow motion to help smooth out what might be a slightly bumpy move. So as lovely as all this equipment is, you know, as long as you're helping your story, you don't necessarily need all this. So actually, half the time for me, it's learning not to take all the toys out with you and just focus on keeping it simple. So I use ProRes and more recently ProRes RAW for a variety of projects and with different productions. So as well as a lot of them often liking raw material. You know, sometimes you just can't do raw with the cameras you're working with, but you want to offer a really good quality codec. So, you know, loads of broadcast suitable cameras like the EVA1 have got great internal codecs, but being able to do, you know, somewhat industry standard ProRes, or in due course as ProRes RAW becomes more and more popular, being able to offer both of those is really helpful for me. So the reason why I like the EVA1 and use that more over, say, the S1H is because this baby's got internal NDs, which are so helpful for long lens work, because with standard lenses, you know, these guys here, I've got 77mm step-up rings, so I can use my variable NDs, which are being used at the moment, to control the amount of light coming into the camera. And so this is great if I'm using my mirrorless cameras or something without internal ND like this. But for bigger lenses, like the 60-600 here, you can only get very few styles. They're mostly protective filters. Being able to use internal NDs like I can here means that I can adapt to the light levels in front of me. And another reason why the Panasonic EVA1 and other cameras like it, like the Sony FS7 and things like that, are so good is because of that raw out, that SDI raw out. So I find SDI is much easier to work with. You know, they've got a locking mechanism. So whether it's the Shogun 7 or the Ninja 5 with the SDI module, I much prefer using those options. But through that raw out, I can get a much better quality slow motion capability, even if it's just 2K, but still slow motion from this camera using ProRes or ProRes RAW instead of the internal, often 8-bit or sub 422 codecs which are on offer with cameras like this when you go to those higher speed frame rates. I use slow motion quite a lot, but it's got to be sensible. It's got to be used in the right way. I think a lot of people can be very slow motion happy and want to use it on everything, because it does make everything look pretty cool. It's a bit novel, isn't it? It adds an extra level of insight, you know, something which is over in a blink of an eye. I've learnt that sometimes actually, you know, real time or even just fractionally slower can be just as effective, if not more effective, in the story development and the story flow than, you know, really extreme slow motion. But that being said, there's a time and a place, and it's fantastic when you use it in the right kind of way. And a few years ago, I jumped at the chance when we had some snow, and I raced across to a nature reserve I knew really well and filmed all the wildfowl coming in to land in against all the snow coming down. And it, in that particular instance, the slow motion aspect of that really helped. So the reason why that setup here works really well for that slow motion aspect is because that ProRes file or ProRes RAW file holds up really well to manipulation. So just being able to push it a bit more in post, so bringing out the colors or bringing out the shadows or trying to manage those highlights a bit more, just to allow the grades to get those files to work with everything else in your edit. Much more so than the internal codecs available in the EVA1. So this whole combo here really opens up this still really lightweight system to do some really impressive slow motion filming. But again, the merits of this camera being so compact is that I can use it on my gimbal, I can use it on my slider, or I can use it like this. And I really like adaptable things, so I like this for what it offers in that compact size. I like the S1H because it offers, you know, really good video as well as actually really good stills, so that it's not just that dedicated camera. So I like things which are adaptable, which is ultimately like why I like Atomos screens, because they're adaptable as either just being monitors or a variety of cameras, or being this ProRes RAW recorder system. So because with wildlife you can't control light, you can't control the scene very much, and what you can control is being in the right place at the right time. So, and what I mean by that is being in the right place for the best possible light. So unfortunately that does mean getting up pre-sunrise often for me, and getting out to my location in good time before the sun is rising, so you get the nice blue hour, and then ultimately that golden hour as the sun's low, and you get that beautiful contrast and that warm light coming through. And that's when I go into full excitement mode and try all my different lenses and see what's going to work, and just try and utilize that time before becoming a zombie for the rest of the day until sunset, and then trying to do the same again in reverse. That's when you can get that particularly magical light, and if you combine that with hopefully one or two special wildlife encounters, those are the kind of things which, for me, for example, reach the opening sequence for a documentary, or, if you're really lucky, you can build a really quick sequence around something unfolding in front of you. So there are some of my ramblings when it comes to wildlife filmmaking. Not sure if any of that made any sense at all, but hit me up with some comments, and happy to talk about this further. The joy for me with what I get to do for a living is that it allows me to try and get a bit more of an insight into the wildlife that I love. Being able to film and document it, and then hopefully share it with you guys and offer that little bit of inspiration, even if it just gets you out the house or gets you seeing an animal or behaviour that you haven't otherwise seen. I find it incredibly rewarding to do. And I really thank Atomos for getting me involved in this academy that they're doing. So keep being creative, keep safe, and enjoy the natural world around you.